First, they prophesied of the iron snake that would traverse the country, years before it happened. Koitalel, Mogo wa Kibiro, Syokimau. And now they are raving about the Madaraka Express that has enamored itself to Kenyans and captured their imagination. But what happened in between? What laid the foundation for our present reality?
We have the history of Kenya Railways dating way back to 1896, when the first rails were laid at Kilindini, Mombasa. And that was actually in May of that year, 1896. Yeah. So we have reached in that history, 1896 to where we are today, 2018. From the meter gauge to the standard gauge railway. We house that history. The creation of the Railway Museum was ideally to help preserve the history of Kenya Railways, and that led to the establishment of this museum in 1971 by the first curator, who was of European extraction, called Jordan. And remember, in 1971, Kenya Railways was a segment of the East African Railways. So we had Tanzania, Kenya, and Uganda railways operating as a single unit. And therefore, it was thought wise to preserve this history. And the establishment, therefore, of this museum here in Nairobi was meant to preserve the history of Kenya Railways.
Before the first rail was laid, the powers that be had to go through the motions at the 1886 Berlin Conference, where European nations divided Africa amongst themselves. Britain acquired East Africa, and on 30th of May 1896, the works that would build the Uganda Railway began in the coastal city of Mombasa under Sir George Whitehouse, the chief engineer. The construction was not without its critics, with among them the radical British parliamentarian Henry Labouchere, who satirized the nascent railway line notoriously as the lunatic line. What is the use of it? None can conjecture. What it will carry, there's none can define. And in spite of George Curzon's superior lecture, it is clearly naught but a lunatic line. The railway line was not purely a British and East African affair, as a virtual army of Indian artisans were shipped over to carry out the actual work.
India, as you know, was a colony of Britain. And therefore, the Indians had had the experience of building mainly this meter gauge railway in their own country. Being experienced in constructing meter gauge railways, it was wise, therefore, for the lead engineer here in Kenya, George Whitehouse, who himself was an experienced railway builder in India, South Africa, Southern America. He thought wise to bring in experienced people to help him build this railway. Secondly, Indians are hardy people. They could survive within the tropics comfortably, fighting off malaria, the hot climate here, and therefore they were preferred. Lastly, they are also cheap, or they were cheap at that time, a cheap form of labor, because it was easier to pay them in rupees, and therefore they will also appreciate that being paid in rupees was fashionable at that time, and that's why they agreed to come into Kenya to help construct this railway.
The coolies, as the Indian artisans were known, had had prior experience working on railway lines on the Indian Railway. The railway works had not gone far before the workers faced challenges at the Makupa Creek and the Mazeras escarpment.
Apart from what I would call engineering issues, they also had the problems with the water. As you know, the locomotives at that time that will supply the railheads with the construction materials were using water, and they cannot use these steam engines could not use salty water obtained from the Indian Ocean. So what happened, therefore, was that the lead engineer, George Whitehouse, had to bring in a desalting plant that was used to desalt this water so as to make it, available for the locomotives. So salty water was one big challenge because, again, as you know, human beings could not consume, take water that was salty. The other issue was constructing the Makupa Causeway as we know it today. Initially it was called Salisbury Bridge that linked Mombasa Island and Changamwe, the mainland. So linking the island and the mainland was a challenge, particularly in Kilindini there. So as they moved inland, they encountered at Mazeras a topographical challenge, and therefore they had to build what we call spirals, okay, and also viaducts, right? Those bridges that will connect one escarpment and the other.
The progress had been slow, and a year after commencement, the railway had advanced a mere 36 kilometers. At that rate, it would have been completed in 1914.
Indeed, the railway was to be completed on time, as it was very important, because the French people had a lot of interest in Uganda. The source of River Nile interested a lot of European superpowers. Okay, so the British wanted to build this line quickly into Uganda so as to take control of the source of River Nile. The French were moving down from the Sudan into the same territory, and therefore the British therefore thought it wise to quickly get the line into Uganda.
Cometh the moment, cometh the man, and the man was Mr. Ronald Preston, who was appointed as the engineer in charge of plate laying in February 1897. At the time, nobody understood the significance of Mr. Preston and his wife Florence joining the bandwagon, but more on that later.
Preston was brought into the fray in about 1898 around Voi to ensure that plate laying, he was an expert in plate laying, that's laying the sleepers. And therefore, when he was brought into the railway construction, it actually, the pace went up, and the railway was able to reach the shores of Lake Victoria.
The works progressed fast, and it was at Tsavo that the railway line acquired a life of its own. While constructing a permanent bridge, the workers were sitting ducks when the man-eaters of Tsavo struck. Scores of workmen were whisked away to their fates by two male lions that daily stalked their camp. Their leader, Colonel J.H. Patterson, turned to hunting them down, which he managed, albeit after 9 months, and not before the lions had claimed numerous scalps.
The engineer was in charge of building that bridge. Colonel Patterson had to devise a way of hunting down these lions, or at least protecting his team. So he advised the Indians to build thorny fences around their camps. But these lions sneaked through these thorny fences and continued harvesting these human beings.
Charles Rial, Superintendent of Police, and he was moving from Mombasa to Nairobi on June the 1st, 1900. He got to Kima railway station, which is about 60 miles from Nairobi, in Cumberland. The station master there told him about a man-eating lion at Kima station. So he stopped and wanted to help. Since he had a gun, he said, fine, I'll help kill this lion before I proceed on my safari to Nairobi. He saw two other Europeans traveling on a train towards Nairobi. So he asked them to accompany him on his mission to kill this lion. So the three of them actually sat in this coach waiting to kill this lion. So in order to attract the lion from themselves, they opened up the sliding door of this coach which we have here in this museum, and they also opened the windows to the coach and sat there for the night. Now, they realized that instead of the three of us keeping watch, why can't we have one individual keep watch so that we watch in relay? The other individual who gets tired will awaken the other. So they agreed. Parenti started it off. Then when it was at midnight, he woke up Charles Real. So Charles Real sat next to the open door with his gun. Now, when he looked outside, he saw some shiny eyes, and he dismissed them as belonging to a cat. Unfortunately for him, since he had just been awoken, he was still feeling sleepy, and he eventually fell asleep while seated next to the open door. Now, the moment he fell asleep was the moment this lion came for him. The shiny eyes he had seen that night, actually belonged to this lion. And this lion came for him while he was sleeping next to this open door. So it sunk its teeth into his neck and crushed it. And he tried now to move with his body out, but in the process, since this was a sliding door, the door shut itself. And therefore the lion was trapped inside his coach with these three gentlemen.
These two lions are immortalized, with their remains at the Chicago Field Museum. On 24th of May 1899, the railhead arrived at Waso, Nairobi, where White House shifted its headquarters. This would later become today's Nairobi. If the railworks were akin to hiking a mountain, then a summit of sorts was reached in January 1901, when the railway reached its maximum elevation of 2,550 meters at Mau Summit, the highest point of any railway in the British Empire at the time. With 160 kilometers left, the end was in sight, and on 19th December 1901, the final rails were bolted together and Florence Preston, remember her? Hammered into place the final spike. With that strike, her place in history was nailed in. Infant Kisumu adopted her name, Port Florence. After 920 kilometers and enormous cost to human life and the British Exchequer, the job was done. There, the foundation for present-day Kenya Railway was laid and operations commenced in 1903. Branch lines started coming up in order to service other areas in the interior. In 1927, the Kenya and Uganda Railways became known as the Kenya-Uganda Railways and Harbours, beginning the evolution to Kenya Railways as we know it today. The meter gauge railway has served the Kenyan people for decades and is still in operation. Over the years, the railway was the scene to some notable moments with dignitaries such as the Queen of the Empire and an American president riding along the lunatic line. If that is not big enough for you, how about this? Yes, DL Class 301 that was used in the movie Out of Africa, the 1985 Robert Redford classic. You can see it exhibited on the Nairobi Railway Museum yard. Other locomotives and carriages that served on the line are also on display in the yard. In 1977, Kenya Railways was established by an Act of Parliament, and as they say, the rest is history.
A lot in terms of naming and logos has happened within, change of logos has happened within Kenya Railways. The first line from Mombasa to Kisumu, when it was completed, it was known as Uganda Railway. And it operated as Uganda Railway under the leadership of George Whitehouse up to 1926, when the name changed to Kenya-Uganda Railway. So this was because the railway had now physically crossed the boundary into Uganda in 1926. The following year, the administration of the Habas was enjoined into the railways, so that now we had Kenya-Uganda Railways in Habas. Okay, so we operated as one up to 1948, with the name changed from Kenya-Uganda Railways and Habas to East African Railways. Remember, Tanzania had initially been a colony of Germany, and it was known as Tanganyika. But after the First World War, the Germans were kicked out of Tanganyika, and Tanganyika became a component of the League of Nations, okay, a mandate territory of the League of Nations. And Britain was given the mandate to look after Tanganyika, okay. So she had now the honors of ensuring the railway transport within Kenya, Uganda, and Tanzania worked seamlessly. And for that reason, the name of this railway changed from Kenya-Uganda Railways to East African Railways. It operated as East African Railways up to 1977, when Kenya Railways was born, after the collapse of the East African community, following political differences between the then presidents of East Africa, Idi Amin in Uganda, Stephen Nyerere in Tanzania, and Jomo Kenyatta in Kenya. So we've operated as Kenya Railways up to today.
You will find it all at the Nairobi Railway Museum. Lost among the key dates and important aspects are some interesting keepsakes still in store at the museum. Open daily between 8 a.m. and 5 p.m., the museum is open to all at an affordable fee. Some make history, most witness it, but here at the Nairobi Railway Museum, we store it for you and for generations to come.